So in this video, I intend to introduce quite a lot of new topics. They are all very small details that I was avoiding to have to introduce before, but I think that they are quite useful. The first thing is the with block. So if you remember now so far, how it works is I open a file and then I have to close it at the very end here, right? Now, there is a way, a very Pythonic way. So the Python community has this word Pythonic, where something is Pythonic when it is elegantly written, like when it is well written, when it looks good in the code. So the Pythonic way to open a file is with the with block. So the way you would do this is, let me just check here for the syntax, just to guarantee that I'm not doing it wrong. So you would say with open the name of the file as f. So here it is assigning whatever is the output of this to the variable f, and then here whatever is inside this block is going to execute with f open, with the file open. As soon as so for example, if I say f.read and I put this in a variable like output, then this is going to execute with f being the output of open here. But as soon as I get out of this block, that is, as soon as I unindent this here and I start writing a equals 2 or a equals 1 or whatever, then at this point here, then the file gets closed. So this is a nice way to make sure that the file is going to get closed implicitly. So you don't have to write it. It just gets closed because you got out of this with block here. So the with block is actually able to do many other things, but the most important thing now is this, that you have a variable that will have some short life, and you want to make sure that this variable is going to be destroyed. So the actually technical word is destroyed when you get out at some point, and then this some point is when you get out of this block. Okay, so this was the first thing that I wanted to tell you. So the next thing I want to tell you about has to do with the word import. So if you remember, every time I use this, I say, for example, import an LTK, and then if I want to access functions from the Gutenberg corpus, from the Gutenberg package here, I would do something like this, an LTK corpus Gutenberg file like this. So I have to write this entire thing here. And you have to consider that computer science people are generally quite lazy, so we don't want to type so much. So it would be nice if I could remove all this part here. So if I could like just take this thing and run, and it would like run the function already. But as you can see, now it says, oh, name Gutenberg is not defined. It only finds the word Gutenberg if I tell Python where to look for. It has to look for it in ltk.corpus.gutenberg. Now, to solve this, we have to use the word from. So the way we would do this is from nltk.corpus import Gutenberg. And then by doing this, now we say, okay, from this place here, import Gutenberg. But the name that Python assigns, the name that Python keeps in mind now is this name Gutenberg. So it remembers that Gutenberg is a thing that has a name, that it knows where to look for. And that is how now when I try to run Gutenberg file like this, it finds it. So you might be wondering, why didn't I actually do here Gutenberg, and then here file IDs, and then so that I could just remove this Gutenberg part here too. So to understand this, I want to bring back some lists of what we discuss, our discussion on lists. So let's create a list here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and let's assign to it this the value like this list to the variable a. Now if I say a dot append and I give the value 5, then when I run a again, it gives me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So as you can see, the variable a here, which is a list, it has functions that you can call from the variable. So I can do dot and then a function from that is called from the variable. These are not actually functions, so the way to call them are methods. This is a fancy nomenclature that you learn when you learn about object orientation, which is some fancy thing about programming that I don't know if I want to go into now. But this is a technical term. These are not functions, these are methods. But the point is, this Gutenberg thing here, it is actually just like a list here. It is also an object. If I do just an LTK, if I just run Gutenberg now, because if you remember well, the actual line was this, right? So now Gutenberg is known for Python. So if I run this now, then you're gonna see this is an object of a type plain text corpus reader. So it's not a list, it is an object of a different type, this type here. And then that is how I can do Gutenberg and then dot file IDs, for example. So this file IDs here, it just does something in the same way that in the case of lists here, it does something. In this case, it might make more sense for you because this append function makes a change into the list itself. But this does not necessarily need to be the case. There could be perfectly another function here that just shows the list in the same way that the frac_dist has a most commons and a plot function that we saw in the previous class, for example. Here we have Gutenberg. So here we have like Gutenberg, and this Gutenberg object has some functions, and the function here that we care about is this file IDs. So that's why we don't have a way to just eliminate this and have just file IDs here, because file IDs is not a name that is visible that you can just access. It depends on having that object called Gutenberg before it. So finally, there is one last thing that I want to show you. The last thing I want to show you has to do with how to open a file from the internet. So if you remember, to open a file, we use this open function, and then we had some string which was the name of the file. Keep this in mind. This will come back somehow. So we are gonna use the URL lib package, and since we already spoke about the from keyword, the way it's going to be is there is a package called URL lib, which is built in Python. It comes along with Python, and inside it there is this request sub package or whatever it is. I don't know if it is an object. I don't know if it is a sub package or a function. I know that it is something that is here, and then I want to decide which text I'm going to open, right, from the internet. So for this, I want to show you this very nice website called textfiles.com. It is some sort of very nice collection of old text files, like all of them are in this ASCII encoding, like ASCII encoding that I spoke about before, which is like the old encoding that was used when computers first came into existence. So here it even says American Standard Code for Information Interchange. This is what ASCII means. So then if you click in where are the files, you'll see that there are several kind of genres here. And maybe you can even call this a corpus. I don't know. I don't think that this is a very systematic collection of these files. I think that it's just files. But let's take this file called memetics here. And as you can see, it is just a text file, like completely just text. So what we want to do, if I try to save this file, if I went to, I don't know how to save a file here. I guess I can only press Ctrl S. Yeah, so if I try to save it, it would even try to save it as a .txt file, as you can see. But okay, we don't want to save it. We want Python to do whatever it will do, right? So let's take the assign the URL here to a string. And now URL contains this string here. And so to open a file, we will use the with block, as we have learned already in this video. And the way it works is you just say request.url open URL. So remember, before we had open and the name, now we have URL open and the URL. And then this request here is just like some syntax thing. You can consider it like this. And then we will use S, and I'm gonna call it response instead of F. It's just because whenever it has to do with how URLs work. Instead of calling, it doesn't matter. I could call it R to make it more similar to the way we have learned so far. And then the way we access the file is with .read, just in exactly the same way that we opened the file before inside the computer. So I'm gonna call raw whatever is read from this, and it is raw because if you remember when we called read, I still have it here. When we called read, we just get a raw string, like one string with the entire thing. So that is why I'm gonna call it raw here. So if I do this now, this will assign whatever was in that URL to this raw variable. So let's see what was there. So if I try to see, it has all the data. But there is something very subtle that you might not have noticed, which is this B here. This B stands for byte. So this string here is not a normal string. It's a bytes string. And this makes a lot of difference. So instead of being a UTF-8 encoded string, if you remember, we have learned that UTF-8 is a very commonly used encoding in the internet. But because these are old text files, they use an old encoding. And the encoding is this ASCII encoding that I spoke about before. And this ASCII encoding is a byte encoding. So every byte is assigned to a letter. And now Python realized this. But to be able to manipulate the data in the way that we were doing it before, we need to convert from the old byte encoding into the newer UTF-8 encoding. To do this, so remember we called it raw. So there is a nice function. Oh, now another thing. If you see, we are reusing all the things that we've learned so far. So now this string here, I can call a function from this string, and this function is decode. And it will do something to the string. But the important thing now is see that it's an object, and the object can call a method here. And then we pass here UTF-8. So what it will do is it will take this entire thing that were bytes, and it will transform it into a string that is in the UTF-8 encoding, which is the default encoding for Python 3. So Python 3 only knows and only likes to manipulate UTF-8 encoded strings. So I'm gonna call this decoded, say. Now, finally, we can actually look at the result, and you see that B disappeared here, and this is a real string. So if I took this raw and I checked what was the type of it, you see that it would say bytes. But now if I take this decoded and I check what is the type of it, you're gonna see that it is strings. So these were all the things that I wanted to show you for this video. In the next video, we will take this new string decoded and the book that we loaded before, the Dostoevsky book, this book here, and we will make some comparisons between the two of them.